The Zimbabwe Resilience Building Fund, ZRBF, seeks to improve the resilience of 830,000 people over the period 2015 to 2021 through a combination of the generation and use of evidence to inform programming and policy, projects building capacities to absorb, adapt to, and transform livelihoods and systems to reduce risks posed by shocks and stresses, and through the introduction of a purpose-built risk financing mechanism, also known as the Crisis Modifier. 7 ZRBF consortium partners operate in 18 districts of Zimbabwe to build the resilience of individuals, households, communities, and systems. The Crisis Modifier has been activated throughout these districts in the last few years, and this film investigates the creation, implementation, and response to this unique mechanism. The Crisis Modifier Mechanism is a form of contingency planning as well as a funding tool designed to provide targeted and timely assistance at local level in response to certain early warning trigger indicators. The mechanism is based on an early warning, early action system that responds to alert, alarm, emergency, and recovery trigger thresholds with a rapid approval system.
So UNDP decided to incorporate a crisis modifier mechanism into the Zimbabwe Resilience Building Fund as per what is known as best practice in the resilience building theory, in order to be able to respond early to any signs of shocks and stresses that might affect the communities that we'll be working in. So actually a team of experts were pulled together from UNDP regional office jointly with a DFID expert on crisis modifier processes. They came to Zimbabwe and spent a couple of weeks here discussing with partners, discussing with potential participants, with government, consulting with civil society, traveling around the country to get a good feel for what a crisis modifier for Zimbabwe should look like. It's really important to understand that a crisis modifier, as everything else that we do in resilience building, must be context specific. So a crisis modifier for Zimbabwe will not necessarily look the same way as a crisis modifier for Kenya, for example. So the team of experts came here. They worked very closely together. They also reached out to other experts, such as the colleagues from ECHO, for example, from the EU, to get their input on how this crisis modifier could potentially look. So it's really a joint effort. The design that we have today was really a joint effort between the contributing donors and expertise that was drawn in at the time of the design. And again, the crisis modifier is designed specifically for Zimbabwe and specifically for the Zimbabwe Resilience Building Fund.
So the crisis modifier was instituted out of the realization that development efforts, previous development efforts in Zimbabwe have been lacking the backstopping support or follow-up support or some developmental cushion component to ensure that the developmental gains registered by beneficiaries are protected. So the crisis modifier came to protect the developmental gains so that those beneficiaries that are put in the development trajectory cannot slide back into the vulnerability trap.
This support takes the shape of no-regret actions to provide fast, effective, and well-coordinated early response to those who might be affected during extreme events. This flexible programming mechanism allows ZRBF consortia partners to apply for funding for early action when needed, with minimal bureaucracy and a rapid approval and disbursement process. It is a flexible tool which is used to scale up and or down certain program components depending on stresses and shocks that set in or are strongly predicted to set in.
First of all, we're very lucky with the Zimbabwe Resilience Building Fund that we have partners that have actually allowed us to be flexible in our programming. Because I think there's a realization that resilience building is not a program that you design for the next 5 years and that's what we'll do as the 5 years unroll, which we see in a lot of our development programs, right? It's a program that from the start, what we call applies adaptive programming. So we are able to shift based on what we see works and what doesn't work. So I think that's first and foremost important to realize, that flexibility that we have to respond to the particular issues. Secondly then, the flexibility crisis modifier provides, because the thinking really is, even if we're adaptive in our programming as we go through the years with the community, there are points where we haven't foreseen the kind of shocks, right? There are points where a drought is heavy or is deeper and more prolonged than we had anticipated, or we have a cyclone hitting Zimbabwe, or we have the economic challenges that we're seeing at the moment. Those were unforeseen shocks, and those, even though we have a shape or a space to adapt, it might not be sufficient. And that's where the crisis modifier comes in and then says, okay, what in addition can we do? So it's a 20% financial savings that we've put aside to say in each community we have 20% of our money that we can then reinvest in crisis modifier when we see unforeseen things hit the community that require a specific response.
Studies into the cost of immediate damage to life and property, coupled with the resources spent on emergency response, have initiated a shift in aid priorities towards greater support for longer-term initiatives to build resilience capacity. These programs have shown that resilience programming and effective disaster risk management can be more effective towards maintaining and sustaining the hard-earned development gains of communities. The Crisis Modifier Mechanism has been embedded as a function into the multi-year ZRBF programming via a set of standard operating procedures, approved by the ZRBF Steering Committee in 2017. The Crisis Modifier is operationalized using a 5-stage approach: normal, alert, alarm, emergency and recovery stages. In the normal stage, program and project operations proceed normally. During the alert stage, Trigger 1 crisis modifier funds can be released after the onset and early detection of stresses and shocks. Up to 5% of the remaining programmable budget can be released and a set of agreed no-regrets activities deployed to offset the negative impacts related to the stress or shock that is occurring. When the stresses and shocks are assessed to be increasing, the release of Trigger 2 crisis modifier funds is activated. This is the alarm stage. At this stage, up to 20% of remaining programmable budget can be released, and upscaled pre-humanitarian response actions will be implemented. When the situation reaches an emergency state and a humanitarian crisis is declared by the national government, the emergency stage is activated. At this point, external humanitarian finances and support are allocated by donors and partners to scale up emergency life-saving support. This occurs outside of normal ZRBF operations, but in close coordination and communication with these stakeholders to ensure smooth transition of interventions. ZRBF operations could either be downscaled or, under extreme situations, suspended. The recovery stage is entered as the trigger indicators return to seasonal norms. The trigger indicators that provide the reporting structure for the determination of stages are separated into 4 categories: biophysical indicators, production indicators, access indicators, and trade indicators. These indicators are closely monitored and monthly reports are made. These high-frequency monitoring reports are made widely available. They can be found online at www.zrbf.co.zw/publications, and they help to inform crisis modifier action.
So we are looking at a situation whereby there is funding coming in, while we are rolling out the main project to protect, for example, village savings in lending investments. You know, households, they invest into livestock, they invest into their cropping activities, but in the event of a shock, for example, a drought coming in, then we need to cushion these households so that they are better able to respond. So one of the most important things about the crisis modifier is it has to be timely. The activation process is something that is quite rigorous. It requires two things, which are stakeholder coordination and evidence generation. So our experience with the ZRBF ECRAS project, we've got the high frequency monitoring system, which is basically a list of 17 prioritized indicators: biophysical, access, trade indicators. All these indicators, when a risk or a shock is manifesting within the context, we can actually be using these thresholds to give us evidence to activate a crisis modifier. When you have this mechanism in place, like the high frequency monitoring, it generates evidence for you. So with the ECRAS project, what we then do with this evidence, we share it with the ZRBF PMU, we share it with the government stakeholders back this side, and then they are able to give us their reflections. They validate this list, and then where we pick up that we may have a risk or a shock that is looming, then we raise the alarm.
ZRBF project is different in that it allows farmers to experiment. There is no specific formulas in terms of how one is supposed to be able to survive different conditions. It also even allows adaptive product programming to see if things are going this way, are we able to continue with what we had planned, or should we change and shift depending on the position or the situation that will be prevailing then.
When we are talking about resilience, we are talking of being able to stand for yourself even the situation is bad or is worst. One is to stand firm or to move forward, regardless of the challenges or problems that are currently on the ground.
We've got a basket of different interventions, for example, solar powered bores, we've got our sugar bean production, we've got our small wares, nutrition gardens, survival feeding for livestock, and then we tailor make how we are going to respond based on the shock.
In terms of activating the crisis modifier, according to myself as an extension worker for this area, it worked very well. The inputs for the crisis modifier came very early before the start of the season. So the farmers were very prepared because they already had acquired the seed in time.
So the crisis modifier is also open to other donors who are not maybe funding all of ZRBF's activities throughout the 5 years. So a good example of this is in the 2019-2020 season, where Zimbabwe was hit by a severe drought. A new donor, which is Denmark, came on board to invest particularly in the crisis modifier. So this is a means of recognizing that the early action is really, really important and that a lot can be done. Moving in with early action activities have proven to be a lot more cost effective. It really mitigates and reduces the risk for the communities, which means that they will be struggling less to re-engage in their longer term activities once the crisis is over. So from ZRBF, all the support from the donors in terms of designing, in terms of mobilizing resources, and in terms of topping up resources has been really, really vital.
I think Zimbabwe has pioneered this work. We're working with Malawi now in the region, for example, but also much broader, even at the global level, where people are looking at the Zimbabwe Resilience Building Fund as showing the way on how to work on resilience building in communities. Of course, as I said, for us, the flexibility that our partners have provided to us is actually quite important. But I do think that has set a path for a lot of countries in this world to sort of look at what Zimbabwe is doing and learn from that, because the crisis, as we see across the globe, either a climatic crisis, the economic crisis, we're seeing COVID now, unprecedented challenges to this world that can't be solved with a linear approach. And so we're seeing Zimbabwe luckily has this fund now in place to show the way, and I do hope that we actually inspire others to follow as well.